picture a fire ant colony. It's a perfect machine, right? A superorganism where every single individual works for the good of the whole. It seems like the ultimate example of selfless cooperation.
Absolutely. That's the image we usually have.
But then, in 1998, scientists discovered something that just turns that idea completely on its head. Deep inside some of these colonies, there are actual, honest-to-goodness assassination squads.
Assassination squads in an ant colony.
Yeah. Sterile worker ants that will never reproduce themselves are systematically hunting down and executing their own queens.
Okay, that's unexpected. Why would sterile workers kill the only reproductive members?
And it's not random. That's the key. The workers are acting like a kind of genetic secret police. They can literally smell which queens carry the wrong version of a specific gene, and they coordinate to kill them.
Smell the gene. How does that even work?
Well, the workers who carry out the hit are the ones who have a different version of that same gene. They are killing to ensure that only relatives, or rather carriers of their specific gene, get to rule the colony.
So it's gene versus gene, played out by the ants themselves.
Think about that for a second. Sterile workers committing regicide based on a single gene. It's definitely not for the good of the colony. I mean, killing your only reproductive member seems like a terrible plan, right?
You'd think so. It sounds completely counterproductive for the group.
So why would they do it? The workers themselves gain nothing. They're sterile. The answer, well, it gets to the heart of what you, me, and every living thing really is.
And that you is the wild, often uncomfortable world of the gene's perspective on life. We're diving deep today into what truly drives evolution, challenging some of our most cherished assumptions about altruism, cooperation, and maybe even what it means to be human in our technologically advanced society. We'll be unpacking why seemingly selfless acts might just be the ultimate expression of genetic self-interest, and how even your very thoughts and creations could be the gene's way of reaching out into the world.
So we're kicking off this deep dive into the secret life of selfish genes, and it really starts with this. Well, this proposition that was so radical when it came out, it flipped the script on how we understand life. For a long, long time, the common idea, the one you see in nature documentaries, was that individuals or groups made sacrifices for the good of the species.
Right, the mother bird faking an injury, or wolves supposedly holding back for the good of the pack, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It feels intuitive, doesn't it? This whole narrative of group altruism, of a collective purpose driving evolution, it was really deeply ingrained.
It absolutely was. But then in 1976, this book landed like a bombshell. Richard Dawkins's The Selfish Gene. And it argued something that sounds simple but is profoundly unsettling. It said evolution doesn't happen for the good of individuals or groups or even species.
No. Then what's it for?
It happens because genes, these tiny bits of heredity, the ones that are good at making copies of themselves, they just survive and spread better than the genes that aren't. It's a totally blind process. No foresight, no grand plan, no altruism beyond the level of the gene itself. It's a perspective shift. Like looking at one of those optical illusions, a Necker cube, and suddenly seeing it flip. The biology is the same, but the viewpoint changes everything.
So if we take on this gene-centric view, it means everything around us. My body, your dog, the plankton, the huge redwood trees, they're all just sophisticated survival machines.
That's the term Dawkins used, yeah. Survival machines.
Built by genes, these immortal blueprints for one main purpose, to make more copies of those genes. Almost like the genes are the passengers, the information that lasts, and our bodies are just temporary cars they drive for a generation or two.
That's a great analogy. The bodies are disposable vehicles. The genes are potentially immortal, jumping from vehicle to vehicle down the generations.
And that really forces you to rethink your own place, doesn't it? It challenges a lot of ethical ideas about altruism, about purpose, maybe even free will.
Definitely. And what's really mind-bending is thinking about the very start. What was the first replicator? Dawkins suggested the earliest life wasn't some complex cell. It was probably just a stable molecule that could somehow make copies of itself.
Like in the primordial soup.
Exactly. In that soup, full of chemicals, maybe the first replicators appeared. It might seem improbable, but given the sheer amount of time involved, billions of years, it only needed to happen once.
Yeah.
And they didn't even need to be organic initially. Maybe simple crystals that grow by adding identical units, acting like templates for themselves.
Okay, but if they just made perfect copies, wouldn't everything stay the same? Where does the variety come from?
That's the key. They're imperfect copiers, like a cosmic game of telephone over billions of years. Every so often, a miscopying happened, an error.
A mutation.
Right. But these errors weren't just mistakes, they were crucial. Without them, no evolution, no diversity, so the soup started filling up with slightly different versions of these replicators. Some variations, just by chance, might have been more stable, or copied faster, or survived better in that environment.
Leading to competition.
A relentless struggle for existence.
Yeah.
Not conscious, obviously, but fierce competition between these different molecular lineages.
So what makes a gene or a replicator successful in this view?
Dawkins highlighted 3 key properties. First, longevity, just lasting a long time, generation after generation. Second, fecundity, how fast and efficiently it copies itself. And third, copying fidelity, accuracy. It needs to be accurate enough to preserve the core information, but not so perfect that it prevents any beneficial errors, any mutations from happening.
And these genes, they jump from body to body. They're the immortal part. Well, we're just...
Pretty much. Genes can pass intact from grandparent to grandchild. They remain distinct units, unblended. They essentially manipulate body after body for their own survival, abandoning each one when it served its purpose.
Okay, but that leads to what seems like a huge paradox. If genes are fundamentally selfish, always competing with their other versions, their alleles, right, for the same spot on future chromosomes.
Yes, alleles are the alternative forms of the same gene, competing for the same genetic real estate.
So if they're locked in this ruthless competition, how do we get cooperation? How do complex bodies even get built? Altruism seems like it should be bad for a selfish gene and selfishness good.
That's the crux of it, and where people sometimes misunderstand. The gene is the basic unit of selfishness, competing against its alleles. But it doesn't operate in a vacuum. Its success depends massively on its environment, and a huge part of that environment is all the other genes in the same body. Think of it as the genetic climate.
So a gene's effect can change depending on which other genes are around.
Absolutely. A gene might do one thing with one set of companion genes and something totally different, or nothing at all, with another set. Genes have to collaborate, whether they want to or not, because they're all part of the team building the same survival machine. Their fate is tied together within that body.
So it's not that genes become nice, it's more like enlightened self-interest, a gene that happens to work well with the other common genes in the population.
The ones it's likely to find itself sharing a body with generation after generation.
That gene will actually have an advantage because the body it helps build is more likely to survive and reproduce.
Exactly. It's still selfish, but its selfishness in the context of the complex internal environment of a body favors cooperation.
Yeah.
It's like everyone's in the same boat. If the boat sinks because the genes can't work together, they all go down. So cooperation emerges as an effective strategy for selfish genes.
Okay, that makes sense. And speaking of complex strategies, let's get back to that really weird idea, the green beard effect.
Sure.
Dawkins came up with this as a thought experiment initially, right?
He did. It's a fascinating hypothetical. He imagined a single gene, or maybe a tightly linked cluster of genes, that could do 3 things simultaneously.
Okay, what are they?
First, it causes the organism carrying it to display some kind of noticeable sign. The green beard. Could be a literal beard, a smell, a specific call, anything perceivable.
Like the fire ant smell.
Potentially, yeah. Second, the gene also allows the bearer to recognize that same sign in others. And third, this is the crucial bit, it makes the bearer behave altruistically, specifically towards others who also have the sign.
So the gene basically says, hey, you've got the green beard too, I'll help you out.
Precisely. And the kicker is, the altruism isn't for the good of the group, or even the individual carrying the gene in the usual sense. It's the gene itself acting selfishly to help copies of itself that happen to be in other bodies. It's gene-level nepotism.
Which brings us right back to those fire ants, Solenopsis invicta, that 1998 discovery by Keller and Ross. It was the first real-world proof of this, wasn't it?
It was a landmark discovery, yes. They found these worker ants systematically killing queens that lacked a specific gene, GP9B.
And the workers doing the killing were the ones with GP9B.
Exactly. They could somehow detect, probably through chemical cues, which queens didn't have their version of the gene, like a genetic secret police sniffing out the imposters.
How quickly did it happen?
Very quickly. Queens without the GP9B gene, introduced into colonies dominated by GP9B workers, were often attacked and killed within hours. And critically, only the workers who had the GP9B gene participated in the execution. Workers without it just stood by.
So this one gene is responsible for recognition and the targeted killing.
It seems so. This murder gene, you could almost call it, ensures that only queens carrying copies of itself survive to reproduce in those colonies. It's an incredibly direct line from gene to a complex, violent social behavior, all aimed at its own propagation.
I sometimes feel I was born with the wrong scent. In every new office, every party, there's an invisible screening process. People sniff the air, metaphorically speaking, and seem to know instantly who belongs. It's not about my clothes or my conversation. It's something more fundamental, a passkey I lack. I watched it happen last week. A new hire, Mark, was absorbed into the inner circle within an hour, his laughter harmonizing perfectly with theirs. They operate on a shared frequency I can't tune into. It reminds me of the fire ants. A queen carrying the GP9B gene is welcomed, nurtured, a sister. A queen without it, genetically almost identical, is sniffed out and torn apart by the workers. They don't hate her. They simply recognize she is not us. There's no malice in their genetics, only a brutal binary logic. And as I sit at my desk listening to the easy camaraderie down the hall, I feel the dispassionate verdict of the colony. I am not a queen to be killed, just a stranger who doesn't carry the gene for belonging.
That's a really powerful way to put it, and it highlights the starkness of the fire ant example. These workers carrying out the killings, remember, are sterile. They get no direct reproductive benefit.
Right, they'll never pass on their own genes.
But their behavior ensures the propagation of their specific allele, GP9B, through the queens they protect, the ones carrying that same allele. It's a stunning example of a gene manipulating its carriers for its own survival, bypassing the individual's reproductive interests entirely. It really pushes beyond simple kin selection, where you help relatives because they share lots of genes. Here, it's about one specific gene promoting itself.
But if greenbeards are so effective for the gene, why aren't they everywhere? Why don't we see obvious greenbeards all over nature?
That's the theoretical problem Dawkins pointed out right away. The vulnerability to cheaters. Imagine a mutation happens. A new allele arises that produces the greenbeard signal, so it gets all the benefits of altruism from others.
But it doesn't perform the altruistic act itself. It doesn't pay the cost.
Exactly. That cheater allele would have a huge advantage, all the benefits, none of the costs. It would spread rapidly through the population, receiving help but never giving it.
And that would destroy the whole system, because eventually everyone would be displaying the signal, but nobody would be helping.
Precisely. The signal would become meaningless. That's why it was thought that true greenbeards would be rare. You'd need the signal and the altruistic behavior to be caused by the very same gene, or by genes so tightly linked they're almost never separated during reproduction. That's a tough evolutionary ask.
So the signal and the action have to be inseparable, genetically speaking.
Traditionally, yes. But more recent thinking, especially using models of indirect genetic effects, or IGEs, paints a slightly more nuanced picture. These models look at how the genes of one individual can affect the traits expressed by another individual.
Okay, how does it help with greenbeards?
Well, IGE models allow us to explore situations where the greenbeard signal and the altruistic behavior don't have to be coded by the exact same gene. If there's a sufficiently high correlation between the genetic tendency to have the signal and the genetic tendency to perform the altruistic act, the system can still evolve and be stable, even with separate genes involved.
So they don't have to be perfectly linked, just strongly associated.
Essentially, yes. The models can even calculate the threshold for how strong that correlation needs to be, depending on factors like how strongly individuals interact and how selection is acting on those traits. It gets complex, but it shows that even if the average genetic tendency towards altruism might be decreasing slightly, if having the signal strongly induces altruistic behavior in others, the overall observed level of altruism can still increase. It separates the selection on the gene from the final expression of the trait.
That's subtle. So it's less about a single altruism gene and more about the network effects within the gene pool.
You could think of it that way, yeah.
Yeah.
And we see these kinds of dynamics even in simpler organisms. Take yeast, for example.
Yeast. How do they have green beards?
Well, not literal beards, but they have this behavior called flocculation. When stressed, say by alcohol produced during fermentation, yeast cells clump together in flakes, or flocks. This clumping is driven by a protein produced by the FLO1 gene. Cells inside the flock are protected from the stress.
Okay, so clumping is good for survival. Where's the catch?
Producing the FLO1 protein costs energy, so cells that make it grow a bit slower. That's the cost of the altruism. But here's the greenbeard part. Only cells that express the FLO1 gene can actually stick together and stay in the flock. Cells without FLO1 get excluded or can't join. So when the stress hits, the non-flocculating cells die off, while the FLO1 cells inside the flock survive and pass on their FLO1 gene.
Ah, I see. The FLO1 gene creates the signal, the sticky protein, allows recognition, only sticky cells join, and leads to altruism, forming the protective group, even if outer cells die. But ultimately, it benefits the FLO1 gene itself.
Exactly. It's a classic greenbeard scenario, benefiting the gene that causes the cooperative, costly behavior.
Okay, so we have genes driving behavior based on self-recognition, like greenbeards. But what about cooperation between individuals who aren't obviously related or sporting a greenbeard? How does the gene's eye view explain that?
That takes us into the realm of reciprocal altruism. This is less about recognizing copies of yourself and more about, well, keeping track of favors. An evolutionary IOU system.
You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
Pretty much.
Oh.
Formally, it's when an organism acts in a way that temporarily reduces its own fitness, maybe costs it energy or puts it at risk while increasing another organism's fitness.
With the expectation that the favor will be returned later.
Exactly. The expectation isn't conscious, necessarily, but the evolutionary system favors individuals who engage in these reciprocal exchanges successfully over the long run. It's another way genes can promote cooperation, even among non-relatives, because ultimately the genes fostering this reciprocal behavior benefit from the stable cooperative environment it creates.
And the classic example here is the vampire bat, right? Sharing blood.
It's the textbook case. And it's fascinating. These bats, they have to feed on blood very regularly, basically every night or two. Missing just a couple of meals can be fatal because they have incredibly high metabolisms.
So finding food is literally life or death every single night.
It is. And some nights, a bat might just get unlucky or be sick or too old to hunt effectively. So a bat that did feed successfully might regurgitate some of its blood meal to share with a roost-mate who failed.
Which sounds incredibly altruistic, giving away precious food.
It does.
Yeah.
But the research, pioneered by Gerald Wilkinson, showed it's not random charity. Bats are much more likely to share with individuals who have shared with them in the past. They remember who owes them and who they owe. They build up these networks of reciprocal exchange. Bats that are known cheaters, who take blood but never give it, tend to get ostracized.
So there's a reputation system involved.
Seems like it. And evolutionarily, it makes sense. A colony where bats engage in this reliable reciprocity is more likely to survive periods of scarcity than a colony where everyone just looks out for themselves. The genes promoting this sharing of shared with behavior thrive because the individuals carrying them are part of a more resilient social system.
My grandmother never spoke of altruism. She spoke of survival. During the lean years after the war, she told me of a neighbor, Mrs. Petrova, whose children were wasting away from hunger. My grandmother had one sack of potatoes left, meant to last her own family a month. One night, she carried half of it to the Petrovas' door, leaving it on the step without a word. An act of pure, selfless generosity, I thought. But my grandmother corrected me. It was an investment, she said, her voice low and pragmatic. In a dead village, our potatoes are worthless. In a living one, a debt is worth more than gold. 6 weeks later, when militia raided their home and took everything, it was Mr. Petrov who appeared in the night with scavenged medicine and a loaf of bread. She explained it wasn't kindness, not really. It was a cold, unspoken contract. You share your blood when you have it because you know one day you will be the one starving. It's the pact of the vampire bats, a beautiful, brutal calculus that keeps the colony alive through the longest nights. You give away a piece of your life in the desperate, trusting gamble that it will be returned.
That's a perfect, chillingly beautiful illustration of the principle. That cold, unspoken contract. It captures the essence of reciprocal altruism, driven by long-term, strategic self-interest, even if it looks like pure generosity on the surface. And this kind of dynamic is exactly what game theory explores, particularly with the prisoner's dilemma.
Right, the scenario where two suspects are caught and they have to decide whether to betray the other or stay silent.
Yes, and if they only play once, the rational move for both is always to betray, even though they'd both be better off if they cooperated and stayed silent. But if you play the game repeatedly, the iterated prisoner's dilemma, things change. Strategies like tit for tat, where you start by cooperating and then just do whatever your opponent did last time, can become incredibly successful.
Because cooperation gets rewarded over the long term and betrayal gets punished immediately on the next round.
Exactly. It shows how cooperation can emerge and stabilize from purely self-interested beginnings, as long as interactions are repeated and individuals can remember past behavior.
And we definitely see echoes of this in human behavior, don't we? In experiments, people often cooperate more than pure rational self-interest would predict, especially if they think others are cooperating too.
We do. There's this idea of conditional altruistic cooperation. We're often willing to cooperate if we believe others will pull their weight. Think about public goods games. People often start by contributing to the pot. But if they see others free-riding, taking the benefits without contributing, cooperation tends to collapse over time. Unless there's a mechanism for punishment. When players are allowed to spend some of their own resources to punish the free riders, cooperation often stabilizes and can even increase. We seem to have an innate willingness to enforce fairness, even at a personal cost, to maintain the cooperative system.
Which ties into things like character virtues, maybe. Honesty, trustworthiness, loyalty.
It could. These virtues, which we often value for their own sake, also happen to be incredibly useful lubricants for social cooperation. If you can trust others to be honest and reliable, it dramatically lowers the transaction costs of working together. Experiments show people often avoid lying, even when they could get away with it, especially if the lie would significantly harm someone else. It suggests we have an intrinsic preference, perhaps evolved, for maintaining a virtuous reputation, which ultimately facilitates the kind of reciprocal trust needed for complex societies. Again, it might serve the genes by fostering stable social groups.
Okay, so genes influence bodies, behavior between bodies, but does it stop there? What about the idea of the extended phenotype? That sounds like genes reaching even further.
It is. This was another of Dawkins' really big ideas. He argued that a gene's effects don't necessarily stop at the boundary of the organism's skin. They can extend out into the environment.
Like the beaver dam.
The beaver dam is the classic example, yes. Dawkins would say the dam isn't just something the beaver makes. It's part of the beaver's phenotype, just like its teeth or fur. Why? Because the dam is a product of beaver behavior, which is influenced by beaver genes. Genes that led to better dam-building brains and bodies got passed on more successfully. The dam is a manifestation of those genes' influence on the world.
And then that dam changes the beaver's environment, creating a lake, which might affect which other beaver genes are favored.
Exactly. That's niche construction. The organism modifies its environment, and that modified environment then acts as a new selective pressure. Beavers living in the stable environment of their ponds might evolve different life strategies, maybe fewer offspring, but more investment in each one because the environment is safer. It's a feedback loop.
That's fascinating. Are there more extreme examples?
Oh yes. Think about parasites. Some parasites manipulate their host's behavior in incredible ways to ensure their own transmission. Like the Saculina barnacle that infects crabs. It essentially castrates the crab, chemically hijacks its parental instincts, and makes the crab care for the barnacle's eggs as if they were its own.
The crab becomes a zombie nanny for the parasite.
Pretty much. The barnacle's genes are extending their phenotype right into the brain and behavior of another species, manipulating it for their own reproductive ends. It's a startlingly direct example of genes reaching beyond the body they reside in.
As an architect, I used to believe my job was to impose order on chaos. I drew straight lines, calculated load-bearing capacities, and designed facades that spoke of human intellect conquering nature. I was proud of my creations, these glass and steel monuments to logic. But last night, flying into the city, I saw it differently. From above, the web of streetlights wasn't a grid I'd helped design. It was the glowing neural network of a single vast organism. The streams of traffic were its circulatory system, pulsing with life. The skyscrapers weren't just buildings. They were our species' version of a termite mound, a coral reef, an external expression of our internal code. We think our technology, our society, is a product of pure reason, a departure from our animal selves. But it's not. It's our extended phenotype. The innate drive that tells a spider to spin a web is the same one that whispers to us to build higher, connect faster, and cluster together in these concrete hives. I didn't impose order on the landscape. I was just an instrument, a single cell helping to build the nest our genes had been dreaming up for 1,000,000 years.
That's a stunning way to perceive it. And it leads right into thinking about the human brain and human culture as perhaps the ultimate extended phenotype. Our genes built the neural hardware, the cognitive abilities, that then allowed us to create these incredibly complex external structures: language, technology, art, cities, the internet.
So things like friendship, enjoying music, building vast social networks, these could all be seen as downstream consequences of ancient genetic programs that helped our ancestors cooperate and survive.
That's the argument. These behaviors and cultural artifacts are expressions of our underlying evolved psychology, which is itself a product of our genes. It's our genes building brains that build culture.
And this connects to gene-culture coevolution, the idea that our culture actually influences our genetic evolution too.
Yes, it's a special case of niche construction. Humans are unique in the extent to which our culture modifies our environment and thereby alters the selective pressures on our genes. Think about the evolution of lactose tolerance in populations that domesticated cattle. The cultural practice of dairying created a selective pressure favoring genes that allowed adults to digest milk. Culture-shaped genes.
And our ability to learn culture, our openness to socialization, that itself must have a genetic basis.
Absolutely. It's a powerful form of epigenetic transmission, too, where experience and learning can change how our genes are expressed, influencing behavior and norms, which then get passed down culturally. There's strong evidence for a genetic basis for moral behavior, with specific brain regions like the prefrontal cortex clearly adapted for navigating complex social rules and moral dilemmas. Our biology evolved to support our capacity for culture, and our culture, in turn, continues to shape our biological trajectory. It's a constant dynamic interplay.
Which is amazing, but also maybe a bit worrying. If our genes and brains evolved for a Stone Age world, how well are we coping with this hyper-modern technological world we've built? This sounds like the evolutionary mismatch problem.
It's a huge issue, yes. The core idea is that our psychology and physiology are adapted to ancestral conditions, small nomadic groups, natural foods, lots of physical activity. Modern environments, huge anonymous cities, processed foods, sedentary lifestyles are radically different. And that mismatch can cause all sorts of problems.
Because our evolved adaptations just don't fit the current context, like running old software on new hardware.
Something like that. And technology often exacerbates the mismatch. It might feel like progress, but it can have unintended negative consequences because it pushes buttons our ancient brains weren't designed to handle at that intensity or frequency. Often, tech provides short-term rewards by tapping into those evolved drives, but leads to long-term trouble. And many industries are incentivized to create products that do exactly that, maximize short-term engagement or pleasure, not long-term well-being.
You mentioned supernormal stimuli earlier with the stickleback fish. Is that how technology often hooks us?
It's a major mechanism, yes. A supernormal stimulus is just an exaggerated version of something we evolved to respond to. Tinbergen's fish attack the ridiculously red fake fish more fiercely than a real rival. Technology constantly presents us with supernormal stimuli.
Like processed food, the exaggerated sugar, fat, salt.
Exactly. Our ancestors evolved in environments where calories, especially fat and sugar, were scarce and valuable. Craving them was adaptive. Today, processed food delivers those tastes and calories in concentrations and combinations never found in nature. Our evolved cravings go into overdrive, leading to obesity, diabetes, heart disease. The mismatch is killing us, literally.
What about things like pornography?
Another potential example. It presents highly exaggerated, often unrealistic visual cues related to mate selection and sexual arousal, potentially hijacking evolved preferences in a way that could lead to addiction, unrealistic expectations, or dissatisfaction with real-life partners. It's providing a supernormal dose of stimuli our brains are wired to pay attention to.
And video games. They seem designed to be addictive.
Many are incredibly effective at delivering supernormal doses of what our brains crave. Achievement, exploration, social connection, multiplayer games, status, managing resources, overcoming challenges. They tap into core evolved drives for competence and social standing, but in a synthetic environment with constant optimized feedback loops.
Don't forget smartphones and social media.
Right, constant streams of novel information, social comparison, status updates, potential mating opportunities, gossip, outrage. It's a fire hose of exaggerated stimuli hitting all our core evolved concerns. Sex, status, relationships, group belonging, threat detection 24/7. It's incredibly hard for our evolved brains to resist that kind of input.
Even just comfort, like a couch, is that a mismatch?
In a way, yes. Our evolved tendency to conserve energy whenever possible was crucial for survival when calories were hard to come by. Resting was adaptive. But today, in environments of extreme comfort and readily available energy, that same drive leads to sedentary lifestyles. We've engineered physical activity out of our lives, but our bodies still expect and need it. The drive to conserve energy becomes maladaptive when energy is abundant and movement is scarce.
This all ties back to culture and maybe Dawkins' idea of memes, ideas spreading like viruses.
It does connect. Dawkins coined meme for a unit of cultural information, an idea, belief, fashion, tune that replicates itself by spreading from brain to brain. Some memes are obviously beneficial, like learning hygiene or a valuable skill.
But others?
Others can spread very effectively even if they harm the individuals carrying them. Destructive ideologies, conspiracy theories, maybe even patterns of addiction. Their success is measured by their ability to replicate, not necessarily by their benefit to the host.
Like religious celibacy. Makes no sense for the genes, but maybe helps the religious memes spread.
That was Dawkins' example. From a gene's perspective, celibacy is a dead end. But from the perspective of the religious ideas themselves, individuals who dedicate their entire lives to spreading those ideas instead of raising families might be very effective vectors for the memes. The meme flourishes, even if the genes don't.
And technology sees particularly good at spreading memes, both good and bad, and exploiting our underlying genetic tendencies. Social media triggering tribalism, advertising playing on belonging.
Precisely. Technology acts as an accelerator and amplifier for meme transmission, often tapping into those ancient genetic programs, our need for status, group identity, recognizing patterns, responding to threats, but applying them in novel contexts with potentially unforeseen consequences. We're constantly navigating this landscape shaped by both our ancient genes and our rapidly evolving cultural memes, often amplified by tech.
So when we really boil it down, it seems evolution does build these survival machines for genes. It's maybe not about a grand plan for the species or even the individual in the way we often like to think.
That seems to be the picture, yes. But the truly fascinating thing, the paradox perhaps, is that this underlying genetic selfishness, this relentless drive for replication, can give rise to behaviors that look incredibly cooperative, deeply altruistic, even loving.
It's like the rules of the game, played out at the gene level, produce these complex, sometimes beautiful, sometimes brutal, emergent strategies.
Exactly. It's a testament to the intricate, often counterintuitive logic of the natural world.
And those ancient rules, honed over millions of years, they're still running the show, aren't they? Even in our world of smartphones and skyscrapers. Understanding this gene-centric view, it doesn't have to diminish the wonder. If anything, it gives you a deeper, maybe more profound lens to look at life, at ourselves, at the whole biological world. It starts to make a different kind of sense.
A surprising amount of sense, revealing that logic humming away beneath the surface, elegantly simple at its core, yet endlessly complex in its manifestations.